Hello and happy Friday. Welcome to Believe in Purdue. I am Sam Sprunger, as always, joined by Grant Flora. Grant, it's a wonderful day for a Friday.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's been a long week, and just for me, but I'm excited to see this game tonight.
Yeah.
I think Purdue and USC, we'll talk about that second half of the episode, but I am looking forward to watching Purdue basketball once again. They're playing good basketball, and this should be a great game tonight. But yeah, just a great day for a Friday.
Well, we're always happy to talk about Purdue, and today we've got a great one to sit here and talk to us about the Boilermakers and then also the Trojans coming into Mackey Arena. We have Dustin Schutte from Sports Illustrated. Dustin, thanks for coming in.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, let's talk generalities. This Purdue team had to kind of find its identity after the past two seasons with Zach Edey, and rightfully so. They relied on the best player in the country 2 straight years. I would do the same, obviously, but when he's not there anymore, they've had to find their identity. What have you seen from these guys throughout the course of the season that gives you some hope and some knowledge that they have really identified who they are now?
Yeah, I think it first and foremost, it probably comes on the defensive end, right? This is a team under Matt Painter. Like, if you go back to the Gene Katie days and the early days of Matt Painter, this was a program that really prided itself on defense, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're still in that paint crew in the student section. They still have that sign that says "Defense lives here," where they keep track of the turnovers, right?
Yep.
So that's been a emphasis for this program for a long time, but. And it's not to say that in recent years Purdue's played bad defense, but they haven't really put the emphasis on turning teams over. But I think this year, with the injury to Daniel Jacobson in that second game of the season, they didn't really have a true rim protector. So I think they knew they were going to have to change things on the defensive end. And so you've seen Braden Smith be a lot more active. CJ Cox has come in, and he's going to be a Carson Edwards type in a couple years. I'm just telling you that right now.
I think so too.
Excuse me, that kid can shoot, but he really puts an emphasis on the defensive end. He can pick guys up full court. He really put a hurting on um, Michigan a few nights ago with his full court ball pressure, creating some
Yeah.
turnovers there. And then Caleb Furst, the biggest asset, for Purdue, I think, is inserting him into the starting lineup and his ability to guard multiple positions. Matt Painter said it multiple times, right? Like, he can guard the big guys with his athleticism and his size, but then he's also mobile and versatile enough to where he can, get off ball screens and he can guard the point guard if he needs to, and just really active hands. Not a shameless plug. I wrote a story earlier this week that basically Caleb Furst. Everybody knows him as Elf, right? Like Buddy the Elf,
Yeah.
Caleb the Elf from those Christmas promos. But he's kind of turned into Purdue's version of Robin Hood, because in the last 9 games, he's had at least one steal. He's had 17 total steals in the last 9 games. So I think for me, it's just this team has been so good defensively. The last 9 or 10 games, they've forced teams into 16 turnovers, getting those fast break points, getting those points in transition. And to me, that's really been the difference since the calendar turned to 2025.
With aside from the stat line that Caleb Furst has put on, how big was him coming back? Like I talked to a bunch of people saying I wouldn't be shocked if he went somewhere else, because he went from starter to bench player to very limited role, and he still came back. And now I know he's a pre-med, and that's why he's at Purdue. But how big was it to have him come back to this roster this year?
It's kind of one of those things where I think the stars a little aligned a little bit, because earlier in the season he was kind of getting the same minutes he was last year because
Mhm.
Daniel Jacobson was in that starting role. They
Yeah.
tried to put Wilberg in at that center position, but that didn't really work out. And Caleb was maybe going to play 10 or 15 minutes, and then you kind of wondered, okay, come Big Ten tournament, come NCAA tournament, when you really tighten up those rotations, is he going to see the floor at all? Because he didn't last year in the postseason. So if there's a silver lining to Daniel Jacobson getting injured, it's the fact that we've gotten to see Caleb Furst, kind of the way he played when he was, I don't want to say a freshman because he was still kind of raw, but that
Right.
sophomore year, he took a big leap. And so it's absolutely huge. I think this speaks to the depth. This was a kid that probably wasn't going to play more than 10 or 12 minutes when you looked at the season, you looked at the outlook after we saw Daniel Jacobson get that starting job. So it just goes to speak to, the culture that Matt Painter has built. And, to me, it's still impressive that you had a kid who was I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I want to say he started 33 games in his first 2 seasons, and then he went basically a year and a half without starting a single game. So the fact that he came back was absolutely huge. But as you mentioned, he was pre-med. He knew what he wanted to do. He knew his purpose in life, and that's a big thing for him, was bigger than basketball. And he wanted to continue to be part of a winning program and a winning culture. And so the fact that he came back, and then Daniel Jacobson gets hurt, Wilbur is really working out, and he's really flourished. I mean, that's every time I watch a game. I was about this earlier this week when they played Iowa. Like, I was really hoping he'd get that 10th rebound.
Yep.
That kid doesn't care about it, but to see him get a double-double in that kind of game would have been really cool. So he's been there were a lot of people that were frustrated by his performance, thinking he took a step back, but I think it just speaks to how deep Purdue is, how good Zach Edey was, because this kid is a really good basketball player. He's just kind of got lost in the shuffle among a roster that is extremely talented.
Yeah, and something I would think I would add to that, maybe get your thoughts on it. Can you believe, starting in June, can you imagine what this team would have looked like if they had both Cannon Catchings and Daniel Jacobson with the addition of Chaikoff and Ren Fletcher, Lawyer, and Braden Smith? I feel like that says a lot about Coach Painter's ability to adapt. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but I was just thinking about that the other day. Like, this team was supposed to have 2 guys that just have not been in there at all, because obviously Catchings ended up leaving and then Jacobson got hurt.
I think what would have been really interesting, I'll hit on the Catchings thing next, but I think what would have been interesting is to see how Purdue would have ramped up their defensive pressure had they had Daniel Jacobson healthy. And then the second part of that is he was really dominant in that opener against Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and that's all we saw. I think he had 13.7 rebounds and 3 blocks, and he was huge. Like, he made some shots, came up with some big plays on the defensive end late in that game that kind of helped them win that contest. But I do wonder about his physique, his frame. He was obviously a pretty slender guy, so coming in, how is he going to be able to handle some of the Big Ten, right? Like, I think Umar Ballo would have probably pushed him around the other day, when they're playing Indiana. There's some other big guys in the Big Ten. Nate Biddle, there's some really good players. So I wonder how that would have worked out. But I think you're right. I think when you look at how Jakari Harris and CJ Cox, and even Raleigh Burgess to an extent, and he's not getting the same minutes as those other 2 guys, but I think when you see how they have developed, I would have been really intrigued to see how he kind of grew into his role as a starting center, if he would have maintained that spot, or how he kind of would have worked out. This is going to sound silly because of how talented Cannon Catchings is and coming in as a 5-star prospect. I don't know if he would have played that much. And I think that's not a knock on Cannon Catchings. I think that's a credit to CJ Cox and Jakari Harris.
Yeah.
I just think he's that good. Now, maybe he takes over because at times Camden Heide and Miles Colvin have struggled, so maybe he would fill one of those 2 spots. I don't really know. But you look at BYU, he's not playing a ton there. He's not putting up lights out numbers, and you would think with that BYU roster, if he was going to fit somewhere, he would do some damage with that team, and he's just not. So I don't know. Maybe he would have fit in a little bit better. Matt Painter knows how to take guys into roles and utilize their strengths. So maybe it's a different situation, but I could have seen that be, I don't know if he would have redshirted, but I could see him being a guy that played 10 or 15 minutes. And you're like, yeah, we're glad we have him, but he's not a huge difference maker on a nightly basis, the same way as like a Trey Kaufman-Renn or a Braden Smith or a Fletcher Lawyer are.
Let's talk a little bit about Braden Smith. With the way he's performing, let's say he just plays, like he has to this point. Is there anybody else in the Big Ten that's going to push him for Player of the Year right now?
I don't think so. But I think maybe some of that may depend on how Purdue plays when they play against Michigan again on the road. I don't think it's going to be another 30-point win for the Boilermakers in Ann Arbor. But I think that those 2 bigs, Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden, have been really good. And the fact that they've gotten Michigan, and I know there's a lot of transfer, they've got a new coach, basically an entirely new team. I think the fact that they took a program and a team that was bottom of the Big Ten last year, I think they finished with just 3 wins in the conference, and got them up to where they're within a game now or maybe it's a half game, depending on how all the games work out. But within a game at least of the conference Big Ten league race. Like I think you got to give those guys some consideration. But I think what makes the difference for Braden Smith is the fact that this is a kid that plays 40 minutes a night, basically. On his off nights, he's playing 37 minutes, so he doesn't get much of a break. He's doing it on the offensive and defensive ends. He averaged 3.1 steals per game in the month of January. He's just been on a completely different level. So to me, I think if Purdue continues to win at this clip and he continues to play at that clip, I think I don't want to say a lock for Big Ten Player of the Year, but he's pretty close. And especially you had Illinois with, I can never pronounce his name, Kasparas Chakachunas,
Yes.
or however it's pronounced.
Yeah, that guy.
He was thought to be considered, but Illinois right now, they're middle of the road Big Ten team. So I think it's probably between him and either Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf. And that's maybe it. Part of the thing may too be, are we going to have a lot of voters who consider Trey Kaufman-Renn as the Big Ten, because he's in that conversation as well. So it's just really interesting. But I think it is between the two guys from Purdue and the two guys from Michigan right now.
Well, right now, Braden Smith is at almost a 3-to-1 ratio, assist to turnover ratio, which to me is just mind-boggling. With the fact that he is averaging, 16 points a game. He's really upped what he's been capable of doing, and what he showed last year. He's only gotten better, and it's you talked about the Big Ten being a crazy conference. I mean, Ohio State beats Maryland after Maryland rattles off 5 in a row. I mean, it just with this conference. Have you seen a crazier conference season to where you've got your upper teams, but then anybody can lose to anybody?
Yeah, I'm sure I have, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. Like you're always in that moment. You think every year's the craziest year, but no, I think you're probably right. It's probably one of the crazier years. Like I said, I think there was a year when like 4 teams tied for second place in the Big Ten, maybe in like 2021, or it was like Wisconsin, Maryland, and maybe Michigan State. I don't remember how that all played out.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty wild year too, but I just think Maryland came into I think there was a lot of questions about Maryland coming into the season after being so abysmal last year, especially the way they shot the ball. They come in and I think it's fortunate that Purdue got them at Mackey Arena when they did get them earlier in the season, right? Because they're playing some really good basketball right now. And then everybody thought Illinois, hey, look at this lineup, Final Four team. You look at their wins; they don't have a ton of great wins on their resume. So they're obviously a tournament team. They're a solid team. You don't want to catch them on the wrong night, but that's a team that's got a lot of glaring holes. They just go on the road and get handled by Rutgers. Like, I know the score was somewhat close, but if you watch that game, Rutgers seemed to be in pretty much control of that contest. So it is a wild year, but it makes it fun. And you've got a 3-team race at the top, and you still have some teams like a Maryland or a Wisconsin that if one of those, Michigan, Purdue, or Michigan State hits on hard times or starts to fall apart a little bit or hits a tough stretch, then maybe Maryland or Wisconsin sneak in there. You never know.
So which team would you say is maybe the most dangerous or has the highest ceiling come March, that maybe in the tournament has the best chance to actually advance far? Maybe not the best team as far as a conference championship, but in the postseason might be the most dangerous.
Yeah, boy, that's a tough question. I think you put Maryland in that category. I think UCLA is a team that's playing bad. Like, I remember a few weeks ago when Mick Cronin was talking about, his guys not wanting to play and basically throwing everybody under the bus. And we all said, oh, that's a really good idea. Midway through the season, just abandon your team. But it seemed to work, right? Like I think they've rattled off 4 or 5 in a row. They've just beat Michigan State. They're playing really good basketball. That's a team that's got a lot of talent. So if they figure it out, I think that may be my pick, because we've seen Wisconsin under Greg Gard. Like, they just, in the tournament, they don't perform at that high level. I think Michigan State, Michigan, and Purdue are set for success in the Big Ten tournament and then the NCAA tournament. I think I would put Maryland and maybe UCLA in that category. Ohio State's another, like, if Ohio State makes the tournament and sneaks in, it's a team that you just, like, they could win their first game by 30 or they could lose their first game by 30. Like, they're just very hit or miss. So that would be an interesting one for me as well.
UCLA has won 6 in a row. And
6 in a row. Okay.
this year's Illinois team reminds me of the Illinois team from a couple years ago. Not last year, but the year before, when they had a lot of talent, but at the Brad Underwood, after they get eliminated from the Big Ten tournament, says we're still waiting to gel. That's not a good time. I haven't seen that this year yet either. They get a couple of games well, and then they just fall apart against somebody that you just don't expect.
Yeah, and I mean, at this point in the season, that's not exactly what you want, especially when you have that level of talent. Like this happened a few years ago too, when they had Sky Clark. Like there were, and then after he departed the team midway through the season, they actually played better. I don't think they have any locker room issues, but sometimes like there's only one ball to go around, and when you have a lot of guys on your team that are accustomed to scoring, it can be difficult. So I think the thing that you appreciate, I think, if you're a Purdue fan, is you have guys on the team that are willing to play a role, and they don't have to score to make a difference.
Yep.
Like sometimes Fletcher Lawyer may have 5 points, but you've had defenses have to chase them around because they don't want him to get hot. Braden Smith can end the game with 8 points, but he dished out 15 assists. Caleb Furst can go, 2 points, but he gets 8 rebounds for you. So there's just, I think that's where people like to talk about a loaded roster, a talented roster, but you also have to have guys that are willing to fill their roles. And I think that's why Purdue is able to do that. I think Michigan State, to a large extent, has figured that out this year as well. And that's why they've been so successful through the first 11 games of the Big Ten schedule on their side too.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break for the audio podcast. We'll be right back. We're going to preview the game tonight at Mackey Arena, Purdue and USC. You are listening to Believe in Purdue on the Believe and Lounge Sports Network. All right, we are back. No, it was a really long break, but now tonight, a big game in my mind for Purdue is tonight at oh shoot, I had the schedule and now I don't. Tonight at Mackey Arena, I believe it's an 8 o'clock start, 7 o'clock start. Sorry, on FS1. Purdue and USC. Dustin, USC has some troubles winning at home, but going on the road now, they're fresh off a win against Michigan State. They're coming in tonight into Mackey Arena. Does that trip west affect them, or from the west affect them, or is that one of those that when you go west to east, it's not hugely detrimental?
Yeah, I think there's still some teams that are probably figuring that out. I mean, this is a USC team that has won on the road. We've seen them win. They beat Illinois. They beat Nebraska on the road. So I don't know that it's a complete hindrance, but I think when you are welcoming a team in from the West Coast, you're happy that you're on the front end of that. You play them the first game, so their bodies are still kind of adjusting. Their minds are still kind of adjusting to that. So I don't know if it's a huge factor, but what I will say is, you look at this USC team from November and then into February, and it's just two completely different teams. I mean, this was a team that struggled to score 40 points against St. Mary. Was it St. Mary's?
Yes, they scored 36 against St. Mary's.
Yeah. Yes, okay, I thought it was St. Mary's. Yeah, and it just looked like, okay, this team is headed for last place in the Big Ten, and it's not even going to be close. But they have pulled off some really big wins. They've played extremely well lately. I think Eric Musselman, I don't know that he's the Big Ten Coach of the Year in the sense that you don't probably give that to a 500 coach, but the job that he's done in season to kind of get this team up and competitive with every team in the Big Ten that they played, I think is a compliment to him and what this program has done.
I just looked at the end of their schedule. They actually lost at Northwestern on Tuesday, so I forgot that they'd played before that.
Yeah.
So, but they're. Yeah, so Purdue's actually got him on the back end of this, but Desmond Claude is I've heard him mentioned for All Big Ten. Is he still performing in your mind as an All Big Ten player with all that there is in the Big Ten right now?
Yeah, that's where it gets tough, right? Like, I think he's probably going to be on one of those teams.
Yeah.
I don't think he's a first-team player, but he probably will be, just because of not only what he does in terms of on the offensive end, but just in terms of what he means to that team. I mean, I think especially early on, he seemed like he was the only one that was producing anything offensively for the Trojans. So I think he probably is an all Big Ten type player, and I think that presents a really interesting matchup for Purdue. So, this kid is averaging 16.2 points a game, 4.2 assists, and he can rebound the basketball too. So it'll be a different kind of thing we obviously haven't seen USC. I think this is their first trip to Mackey Arena. I think they came to Purdue in like the 40s or something before
Right.
Mackey was built. So it'll be a new challenge, new test. And this is the first West Coast team to come in the Mackey Arena, right? So this is something completely different. This will be the third West Coast team, former Pac-12 school, but they played Washington and Oregon on the road. So this will be the first time we've seen one of those Pac-12 teams come to West Lafayette.
Yeah, and we know that USC poses a lot of big guards, and just is a pretty big team overall. So I'm interested to know how Purdue might be able to handle that, because we know they have struggled with some pressure in the past. I think it's going to be hugely helpful if they're in Mackey, but this is a USC team that might throw some pressure at them and might be able to kind of just cause problems because of their size and length. What do you think about that?
I think that's possible, but I also think at times when you've seen Purdue play against length, they've handled it fair. Let me rephrase that. They've played it well in the Big Ten, because if you go back to games against Auburn, games against Marquette, Texas A&M, even if you go back to that season opener against Texas A&M Corpus Christi, those teams that shoot the passing lanes have really given them trouble. Now, I think the fact that Purdue's been able to gel, they kind of know what everybody's doing, they're all on the same page, has really helped them, benefited them on the offensive end. And obviously, Braden Smith is playing at a completely different level. Not only is he playing well, he's playing really smart basketball. But I think if you go back to the game in early January or mid-January against Nebraska, Nebraska's got some pretty sizable guards, and they're a very good defensive team, and Purdue was able to kind of get through that. And Michigan, obviously with Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden, that's a really big, sizable team, and Purdue didn't really have any trouble with that. I think you even say Indiana, to an extent, has bigger potentially guards that could give Purdue trouble. But so to me, it's never about the guard play. It's can Trey Kaufman-Renn stay on the floor? Can Fletcher Loyer, are they hitting shots? Like, that's been the biggest concern recently. Like, if they are hitting 3-point shots, they're probably going to win the game by 25. If they're not knocking those down, you're going to be in for a dogfight. And maybe they pull away late, but those are the defensive battles. That's why they had trouble against Indiana. That's why they had trouble against Iowa in the first half. Like, to me, I think USC is capable of slowing them down, but we've seen, for the most part, teams just kind of want to run Purdue off the 3-point line. So if USC is successful at that, then I think it'll be a closer game than maybe people expect.
With TKR, is he more influential on how the game goes than a lot of people give him credit for? Because it seems like in the last two games he's averaged 25, or he's got 23 and 25, but he's been in foul trouble both of those games. So is he more influential than a lot of people think?
I think so. Yeah, I think he is. It's funny because at that IU game, when we were coming down the final stretch, it was, I think he was going to the line for his final 2 free throws, basically. And it was, I think he was plus 21 in 26 minutes or plus 26 in 21. I don't remember what it was, but I remember looking at the person sitting right beside me and turning and saying, he's plus 21. And I don't think that tells the whole story, like how impactful he was. Because if you go back to that Indiana game, like, Purdue could not get a rebound with him off the floor. And so he does those little things where I think if you look at the stat sheet, he doesn't always he's not a Zach Edey, right? He doesn't get 25 points and 15 rebounds per game. Like, it's not, but he puts a body on guys. He allows Braden Smith to get rebounds. He allows Caleb Furst to get rebounds. He allows CJ Cox to get rebounds. And then on the offensive end, he just adds a different dynamic. And Matt Painter said it the other night after the Iowa win, like, we don't have anybody that can score in the low post the way Trey Kaufman-Renn can. And teams have had trouble stopping that. He's had 23 points or more 4 times in the last 5 games. So, but I think it goes beyond scoring. I think Purdue can find buckets even when he's not on the floor. They can't rebound when he's not on the floor. And it's not, I don't necessarily think it's a lack of effort. I just think it's a lack of not having another guy who can put a body on somebody and keep other teams' top rebounders off the glass. So I think he's invaluable, but I think sometimes his value exceeds what you see in the box score.
What's the key tonight for Purdue then? We've talked about various things. Is it setting their own pace and not letting USC dictate what Purdue does?
I think when you have a game like this, and I think we saw it a little bit against Indiana, we definitely saw it in the first half against Iowa. I think, to me, Purdue is obviously the better team in this. I think they've got better players. You just got to come out with that energy. And sometimes at this point in the season, it gets really hard. You're 23 games into the season. Guys are getting tired. Guys are getting bumps and bruises. Sometimes it can be hard. I think you just have to come out and play hard and give a lot of effort and create that energy. And I think that they've struggled with that. They especially struggled with it on the road. But I feel like Braden Smith said this at halftime of the Iowa game, basically like, hey, I told the guys at halftime, if you want to win a Big Ten championship, we're going to have to create our own juice, create our own energy. So I think beyond the X's and O's, I think it's can you come out with enough energy and just put USC away early, much like they did against Michigan. Like if that team comes out and plays PO'd, they can run a lot of teams out of the gym in a hurry. And I think that may be a big key. I think the other key is can you hit shots? This is a team that has really struggled. It goes back and not to give people flashbacks and nightmares of the 2022-23 season, but that was a team that late in the year and then in the in-state tournament struggled to hit the three ball. So you'd like to see more consistency from that because what happens if Trey Kaufman-Renn does get in foul trouble and takes away your post presence? To me, those are the big keys. But again, as Matt Painter says, it seems like every week, right? Like if we limit our turnovers to 12 or less and we win the rebounding battle or about even, we're pretty damn good. So yeah. I think that those are some big keys in this. But I think it comes down to, again, energy and shot making because I think in every other aspect, I just think that they're a better team than USC.
Well, and you talk about, just being the better team. Purdue's the better team when Ohio State comes into Mackey Arena too. And look what happened there.
Yeah, and that's they just lost their defensive tenacity. Like a few shots went in for Ohio State. It was just like guys were just kind of looking around, looking at. Now a lot of people thought because of that West Coast trip, because of 6 games and 16, or maybe it was 5 games and 13 days at that point. I don't remember. But whatever the case, they just kind of lost their energy, lost their juice, and that's again, we've seen them get plagued by that at times this season. So you got to continually keep that up. They've talked about at times this season they're not the best communicators. It seems like, I don't know if you guys watched this, the replay of the Indiana game. They did like that video, and you got an inside look at Fletcher lawyers and guys' faces like, hey, does everybody know what they're doing? Like, you've got to have that guy. It doesn't have to be Fletcher lawyer every night, but it's got to be somebody every night. And I think they just lost that in that Ohio State game. But it seems, I think they're locked in. I think they'll be locked in for this one. It's a quick turnaround, though, so you never know. Like, from Iowa City on Tuesday night, then you play a game just a couple of days later with a short scout. USC's been in town for a while, so we'll see what happens. But and you got to remember too, these are 18 to 23-year-olds, right? Like we all remember that. We don't have it every single day, so sometimes they don't either.
Dustin Schutte, Sports Illustrated. Let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, so I cover, as you mentioned, Purdue. Pretty much every sport that Purdue plays, I'll cover it. So you can find me at si.com/college/Purdue, and you can find all of our content there.
Awesome. Well, Dustin, thanks so much for coming in and talking Boilermakers and previewing the SC game tonight. Really do appreciate it. Love what you do there with Sports Illustrated. Hope to have you back and keeping us in tune to what's going on in West Lafayette in the future.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Grant. I really appreciate it.
Well, Grant, another fantastic episode. Let's beat the Trojans tonight.
Yes, indeed. Let's come out. They can't look past this game, man. It's easy to look past and look at that Michigan game, but this is one that could go south pretty quickly if they aren't prepared.
Yep. Well, thanks so much for joining us on BLEAV in Purdue, and we'll see you on Monday.